Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Today's featured guest is Gregory Byrd. He is a native Floridian who grew up just south of Key Largo on Plantation Key. He has lived in Pinellas County since 1983, when he began his studies in literature and creative writing at Petersburg College under the instruction of Florida Poet Laureate Peter Meineke and novelist Sterling Watson, among others. Greg earned a master's in creative writing in Florida State University and a PhD in American literature at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. He has taught writing, literature, and humanities at St. Petersburg College in Clearwater since 1990. Greg's scholarly and artistic interests are influenced by the culture and landscape of Florida, as well as by his studies in poetry. Tampa poet Sylvia Corbello writes that Greg's poems, quote, embody the restless energy of the Florida landscape, a place of stories fathers tell over beers and heroes facing unordinary times. In his poems, you're likely to come across references to Puccini, Beethoven, Faust, and Genesis in one line, and then to images of Everglades muck-rusted shotguns or dead tarpon in the next. He has recently finished a novel about an American pilot flying for the British during World War I, where shadow meets water. You will also find Greg's prose in publications such as the Tampa Bay Times, Good Old Boats, and the online food journal From Plate to Palate. Greg's poems have appeared widely in journals such as the Tampa Review, Appalachia Review, Cortland Review, Milasau, and Poeteca, Albania in Translation, and many others. Among his poetry books are The Name for the God Who Speaks, Texas Review Press 2019, Salt and Iron, Snake Nation 2014, At Penwell, Split Oak 2011, and Florida Straits, Yellow Jacket Press in 2005, the latter of which won the first Yellow Jacket Press chapbook contest for Florida poets. Among his awards are the Robert Phillips Prize in 2018, a Creative Pinellas Rapid Returns Fellowship in 2016, Fulbright Fellowship to Albania 2011, an SPC Distinguished Teaching Award 2015, and a Pushcart Prize nomination in 1988. When not working on his writing, Greg fishes the flats near Clearwater, sails, rides his bicycle, and works on his 1966 Ford pickup. He is founder and advisor of the Student Veterans Association at St. Petersburg College. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Gregory Byrd. Hi, Greg. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Christina. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming on and giving us the opportunity to learn more about you and your work. Now, before we begin, I want to start by saying you are one of my professors at Petersburg College, a small private liberal arts college here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And looking at your bio, I didn't know that you are also an Petersburg College alum who, in fact, studied under Peter Meineke, the Florida Poet Laureate.
Yeah, I finished up at Eckerd in 1987. Mm-hmm. So it's one of the reasons I liked working with the Pell program back then. And I think the creative writing program has changed a lot. They've got a lot of exciting new professors there now, but back in my day, that was Peter Meineke, Sterling Watson, and Nancy Corson Carter were the writers who were there, and it was a vibrant, exciting place to be then.
I went through the Programs for Experienced Learners Pell program, and it was I benefited so much from that program, and it's sad that they closed it. There's no more Pell program for us, who went to school at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoyed working with, I read some of the thesis, I was on some of the thesis committees for some of the Pell writers, including, I don't know if you knew Ann Ney. She's creative nonfiction writer and a Coast Guard veteran. And there were just really some people doing some really great work at night. And, that almost seemed like a college of its own.
Right. It was a very enriching program. I'm so proud to be a part of that. The course I took with you at Eckerd College, I believe it was ecology and literature.
I think it was literature and the environment.
That's it. And I think I did a paper on something so bizarre like ecofeminist response to the old man in the sea.
Yeah, that was cool. that was.
You probably thought, "Oh my goodness, this one's trouble."
No, actually, those kinds of things I find really exciting. My dissertation focused on eco-criticism, mostly looking at wilderness and early 20th century American literature. So, that kind of focus, especially when, most people wouldn't think, old man in the sea, feminism, eco-criticism works for sure. But feminism brought a different approach to it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what, from my perspective as a woman reading that, I had so many questions, man versus environment. Why does it always have to be a man, So it's just, that you see that trope a lot being repeated. So, but I noticed that your work has a lot of ecological or nature leanings. How much of the Florida landscape influenced your poetry and writing?
Well, I grew up in the Florida Keys. My parents moved down here when I was, about 6 months old. So this is all I've really known. I'm trying to, who was it? I don't know if it was Barry Lopez or maybe somebody else who said that the landscape that you grew up in is kind of imprinted on you by the time you're about 12 or so. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, there's a lot of people who talk about Florida and they say, oh, it's kind of boring. But, Florida to me has such a variety of ecosystems and landscapes, and especially, growing up near the water, there goes my clock. Especially growing up near the water, the water becomes your prairies and your mountains and your fields and all that. And I think in Florida, sometimes it becomes even more important, especially if you're thinking about hurricanes, things like that, because this I don't want to get into a big lecture about my dissertation, but the kind of storms and different seasons and things we have really affect the way people act. Mm-hmm. We get a hurricane, people start acting totally different.
Yes.
Sometimes they're not very nice. Sometimes, people in my neighborhood sort of live in rather working class neighborhood, and we kind of pulled together and we were asking each other, you okay, you need anything, and looking at each other's houses and all. But
or they have another excuse to have a hurricane party.
Yeah, and that's there's always.
I hear that too. It's like, oh my goodness, aren't you afraid? No.
That's that's part of Hemingway's background too. When he was in Key West, he would write a lot about how back in the 40s, people would come to Key West and they were kind of ruining it in a way, and. In the Keys, especially, we would make fun of tourists and
sure,
and all. But I guess that's the way it's always been, one way or the other.
Okay, so you grew up in the Florida that is not recognizable anymore, the old Florida. Can you tell us a little bit of how the landscape was different then?
Well, I don't know if you know Mary Jane Riles. She's poet laureate of the Big Bend and a poet and a fiction writer up in Tallahassee area. But we went to Florida State together, and we kind of talked about that. The difference in Florida versions of Florida, and I realized some time back that my perspective of what Florida was about, at least the one I wrote about, was really a very particular one, and focused on more of a working class experience. I remember, my parents were doing fairly well by the time I went off to college, but before then I remember hanging out with people who were plasterers and carpenters and things like that. So we would everybody had a fishing boat and out into the ocean and catch dolphin, what they call mahi, and and I had a cast net and I would catch mullet and things like that. And I don't know, less just seems to be a less kind of corporate, more country version.
Yeah, there was particularly in Pinellas County. I heard that was nothing but orange groves, and I can't even imagine it now, seeing how congested it is, and it's like a concrete jungle, as they would say, strip mall after strip mall. And when I read stories about Florida, old Florida, I just kind of try to think about how it was back then.
And that's one of the, that's really one of the, I think, most interesting things. It connects with American studies too, but I think that's one of the most interesting things about Florida is that from the kind of Western perspective, the first time, Spaniards and French and Anglos came to Florida, they all had an idea of what Florida was. And, I don't know if you know the narrative of Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, who came with Narvaez. They ended up going through, I don't know, 2 or 3 different hurricanes and all kinds of different things. But Cabeza de Vaca actually got to know some of the people through Florida and Texas and the Southwest. But there's so many different perspectives of what Florida is all about. There were people in the 19th century who would come down because it was a good place to recover from different kinds of illnesses and things. The Seminoles retreated into the Everglades as a way of resisting the United States government. And I don't know, Florida's always been, partially, exists in people's minds. This is what Florida appears to be to whoever, whether it's Disney, interstates. Well,
and there's also Zora Neale Hurston's take, because she was from here. So yeah, I mean, I've lived here now for a good 15 years, and it's become part of me everywhere I go. Actually, it affects me. It really moves me, no matter where I go in the world. You're an English professor at St. Petersburg College. How long have you been teaching there now?
Since 1990. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's terrible. Coming up on 30 years. Well, it's one of those things that, you don't really, I finished up my master's at Florida State in poetry and was looking for a job at the time. And SPC had a job open and I applied, and that was out of the I don't know, 10 different jobs I applied for, that's the one I got. And it paid pretty well. We teach lots of classes there.
Yeah.
So, many more than you teach at a university. But actually, there's some experiences that I've had that make me very happy that I ended up there. I wish I didn't have to work quite so hard, but the students that I get to know and especially work with when it comes to literature and creative writing are often not students who would end up at University of South Florida or Eckerd or UF or Miami or something like that.
Right.
Because they end up, I had one student who ended up going to New College after SPC. And I think she had gone on the road with a band when she was 17. She it was a groupie for a rock band or something. And one day decided, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. And, saved up some money and, got a job as a bartender and just went back to school and did some really wonderful stuff and got into the State Honors College.
Wow.
Another guy, he's up in Tennessee now. His name is Steve. I don't think he ever finished a degree, but he was brilliant and would come and take classes and published an essay about his father in the St. Pete Times.
Wow.
They had the Sunday Journal column.
Right. Yes.
And then, being able to work at, when program for experienced learners, to teach a class there once in a while and get to meet people like you and, folks who aren't taking the standard, I'm 18, I'm going to college, I'm, move into this and this. There's a lot of people who feel guilty about that.
Well, I started at a community college and I was, oh my God, late 20s. And then, that was up north. I finished my community college 2 years, went down here, followed my parents here. And then that's where I got enrolled in Eckerd College at the creative writing program. So yes, there's a lot. And then on to MFA. But thank goodness for writing programs at community colleges and small colleges that makes it accessible for folks that just didn't have that fast track to academia, So
and people take different paths, and there's a student of mine. He just turned 40, finished his last year, I think, finished his bachelor's in biology at St. Pete College, and has a job as a ranger down at Honeymoon Island.
Oh,
and he's writing great poems. I mean, he loves to write. And he loves science and he loves animals and biology and things like that. I don't know, things, I just finished doing some carpentry this afternoon. I was all sawdust and stuff all over my shower before we came home. And
I noticed you do a lot for the local veterans here with writing programs. Can you elaborate more on that? And why did you choose to help veterans with creative expression?
Well, I haven't done a whole lot with the vets when it comes to writing programs. There's been a couple of opportunities there, and there are veterans who end up in my composition classes, sometimes in creative writing classes. I actually learned this was a few years ago. There was a student in creative writing, and he had served in the Marines in Iraq and Fallujah early on, and he was in my creative writing class, and he said, I think I live across the street from you. And It's true. And I remember when we first moved in, there was a star in the window of that house. His mom was still living there. And, that's when he was overseas. So, but that's usually what I've been working with the Student Veterans Association at the college, and and veterans are as varied as anybody. A lot of folks will make a lot of assumptions about, they all like guns, or, or they're all, they've all got PTSD and they're going to freak out, or whatever. And, some people do. And, some people have some invisible wounds that they come back with. One of the tools they learn, in the service is, to work with firearms. But, and some of them, love, to build and fire guns, and others like to go to the range. But most of them are just regular folks working on transitioning back into society and trying to figure out how they can continue to give back, and to serve in different ways. And whenever they can interact with our regular student body, that helps everybody. Regular, civilian students get to see, hey, the guy next to me, he's pretty laid back, and I didn't know he was in the Army for 5 years. Yeah, that's as with anything, it's a way of breaking up, those
stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now I understand that you have a poetry collection that's new. Can you tell us more about that?
A chapbook just came out. It's called The Name for the God Who Speaks. And this chapbook won the 2018 Robert Phillips Prize from Texas Review Press.
Wow. Congratulations.
I thank you. I was kind of surprised because it's what did Terry Kennedy, who wrote about it, talked about it being a story about, or a book about a sort of an annus horribilis, a horrible year. That was a year when I had lymphoma, and my dad died at the same time. My cat died too.
Oh no.
It was, I think everybody has those though, but I was very surprised that they would want to publish a little book of poems about stuff like that.
Well, I read your collection and it's beautiful. I mean, you definitely got that lyricism and just great storytelling as well. Do you have a couple of poems you can share with us?
Yeah, you know how it is when you read poems. You think, well, I'm going to do this, and I'll do that, and I'll do this. Well, you mentioned lyricism, so I think I'll read the title poem.
Okay.
This is called This is the Name for the God Who Speaks. And I didn't really know that this was about my father until I sent it to Michael Trammell at Appalachia Review. And then it was incredibly obvious. And growing up in the Keys, my father liked to go fishing out in the Gulf Stream, and he would take me out there. And somehow I connected this. There was a storm coming through here in Clearwater at some point, and I started writing about this, and I was looking at the lightning and really thinking about, the different types of language, without words. I'll just go ahead and read it. This is the name for the God who speaks. Father, you would know these primal prayers, light flashing in the west behind live oaks, a sky-slashed language dead after conquest. From that living world, we share only lightning, an old God speaking light out of darkness, a chant of rain as alphabet, where water flowing is a word. I found a picture of us 25 years ago after your divorce. We stood in front of the old Florida Keys house where I grew up. You poured concrete there to appease those Calusa gods, then steered your small boat into their vast ocean, where you taught me words that cannot be spoken, for greenrayed depths, the language of whale sharks surfacing, fishblood across decks and on hands. Loneliness of the Gulf Stream moves over the horizon, lightning chants, dark by the time you hear its name.
Wow. Amazing. I mean, I totally can, the imagery there. So that's the namesake of your poetry collection. Do you have another one?
I was trying to decide if I should, with two, if I should just go with the very last one, because there was, when I do a reading or when I put together a collection, I don't like to see, a movie or a play or things like that, where you get beat up a lot. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you seek the balance, right?
Yeah, it's one thing to go through everything, but even in Shakespeare at the end, there's Horatio at the end of Hamlet comes
kind
up
of a resolution of some sort. Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible to just kind of get beat up and go through a lot of difficult things, and then you're just kind of left hanging that way. So this is a poem about my daughter. And I read this at a conference once, and the poet Michael Heddick from Miami, I think he's retired now and is moving up north. But he said something like, "It was really brave of you to read that," and I think you'll see why. But it's especially resonant, I think, a little bit with sort of the Me Too movement, and my sister was 3 years younger than me, so I didn't have the experience of having, very much younger siblings that I was taking care of. And I think I was 34, 35 when my daughter was born. So this was all kind of new. When I was first a father, I remember bathing my daughter, and not having had much of an experience of doing things like that before. It was kind of weird at first, but there's something joyous about children, and about how they don't know any of the terrible things that happen. In this poem, I was really thinking about, coming from that. And I guess, like you would think about Blake, Songs of Experience and Songs of Innocence, coming at it from a position of experience and knowing some of the horrible things that people do to young children, and then, but my daughter knowing just, this is Dad.
Yeah.
So this is Bathing. I remember first washing my daughter, her infant body with the early markers of her sex, the awkward feel of taking down her pants, lifting off her shirt, as if some matron watching was ready to scream, "Pervert!" But here is no lust, only love, and I am reborn into a hand of gentleness that washes like a mother her most sacred crevices young men will one day lust for. Now, at 5, she washes herself, but begs me to dry her. For I wrap the towel around her suddenly, trapping her arms and swaying her back and forth, a giggling, shining smell of soap and bath water. I dry her lengthening legs, her pouting belly, her long hair, pat her lightly on the butt with the folding towel. Now, go get your jammies on. She does not know that her innocence makes me fresh and clean too.
Oh, that's beautiful. So you have also, I heard that you completed a novel.
Yeah, I was
the last time I saw you was at that, what was it called? University of Tampa, the
Other Words conference.
Yeah, and you were working on it, and now you finished it. That's great.
Yeah, I had I was lucky to get a sabbatical at SPC, something that's on hold right now due to budget cuts, and I was able to go to France.
Oh my goodness!
England and Scotland. Went to the.
So you did the research. You went over there to do the research too. Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and I know you're working on a World War II novel. And boy, in the Somme area where a lot of the battles from World War I took place, there are just so many battlefields and graveyards, just one after the other, and places that are still, they're called red zones, zone rouge, that are, you can't go there. Whole villages in some situations were just moved because of, even today, unexploded ordnance, pollution. I think they said at the rate they're at, clearing unexploded shells and mines and things like that, I think they should finish in about 700 years. Something like that. It's ridiculous. This is World War I.
Oh.
We're 100 years later, and farmers are still digging things up.
That's crazy.
But partially the novel that I was working on is a way of talking about some of the trauma that I dealt with my own experience with cancer and losing my dad, but also some of the things that some of the student veterans tell me. I can't write their story, but I've always been interested in turn of the century, World War I, that kind of period, and airplanes.
Well, I can't wait to read it. So are you shopping for publishers? Do you have publishers in line or literary agents?
I just sent off to another agent. Appalachia Review published a chapter.
Oh my goodness!
In their last issue, and I got a call from a guy named Nat Sobel, who was an agent in New York City, and they asked us, and they.
Oh my goodness!
They liked the writing, but they didn't think it quite worked for them. So I sent off to some other agents.
Just keep trying. Just keep sending. It's a numbers game too.
That's my friend. Polly Buckingham, who also went to Eckerd. She won recently an award for her short story collection, The Expense of a View. And she said she had sent that thing out 100 times at least. And
wow. Wow. Well, the thing is, you completed it. That alone is cause for celebration.
Yeah, it was nice to get it done. But the funny thing is, one of my characters, and she's kind of a minor character. Once I finished that book, this young woman named Emma just won't leave me alone. She keeps popping up. I see her name here and there.
I can relate to that. Yes.
You know, you've had characters that won't go away.
Yep. And you're wondering, I'm like wondering, why do you keep showing up, and why am I having conversations with you? Mm-hmm. You know, it's to me, I mean, I grew up in the Philippines where it's a lot of, you know, superstition and, you know, about spirits and all this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I chuck it out to be like, you know, spirits talking to me, you know.
Well, there are Emma has a tryst with my main character mm-hmm. In the first novel, and but she's you know, her backstory was just, you know, begging to be discussed, and mm-hmm. I kind of found out that her brother, whom she was close to, died on the second day of the Battle of the Somme in 1916, mm-hmm. and that she just sort of felt like she would just kind of meet people who had also lost someone. Mm-hmm. And you know, when I was going through cancer and all, I would kind of notice that you know, if you met somebody else who had cancer, you respond to them in different ways. Yes. You know, you don't go into the, oh my God, that's so terrible. You know, like, you know, how long's it been? Or, you know, are you, you know, are you recovered yet? You know, what kind of treatment did you have? What stage was it? Mm-hmm. And there's something about being in that, you know, in that kind of world that's a little bit different. And that's kind of the situation that Emma's in, is that she kind of meets people who have been in the same situation. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe she's a springboard for another novel.
I'm about 85 pages into her.
There you go.
and that's, I know lots of people have done that. Lots of men have written about women, but you know, that really has you know, really makes me feel strange, you know, to write about a woman, especially from that period. Mm-hmm. You know,
from her perspective.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. It was the same thing about the character in the first novel, who is he's an American. He ends up flying with the British mm-hmm. As a combat pilot, and you know, to get back to our discussion earlier about you writing about Hemingway, there was kind of this story that I wanted to tell about this pilot and his experience with combat and dealing with, you know, his experience. And I really thought, well, you know, I shouldn't be doing that. You know, I haven't exactly experienced that. And I found up some letters from Hemingway mm-hmm. In, I think, his collected letters, but he was giving a reading in Italy, and this old Italian gentleman came up to him and he said, you know, that what you wrote there, that's perfect. He says, you know, I was there too. You know, I was in that battle too. And Hemingway said, I was not in that battle. He said, you know, I researched it and I wrote about it. And the Italian guy just said, no, you were there. You were. And Hemingway couldn't convince him that, no, I researched it. I asked people about it. And
interesting.
You know, and so I kind of, mm-hmm. I kind of had the idea that if you approach it carefully and respectfully, that it's possible to write about somebody different than you, and to make it, you know, convincing, and to do a good job with it. Right. And I kind of thought Hemingway gave me permission to do that. And but in my head, I'm thinking of somebody asked Flannery O'Connor once, why do you not have any black protagonists in your novels or in your stories? And she said, if that's who you are, you should write those. She said, I can't write that because I'm not in that position. And there's a whole lot about agency and appropriating other people's stories and things like that. But I think that often ends up more in the discussion from the critical side. And what I hear more from writers is, when you're a writer, you're making things up. You're trying to tell a good story. And sometimes your character might not be the best representative of his or her race, class, whatever.
Sure. Well, Greg, it's been great talking to you and learning more about you and your work. And congrats on completing your novel and your chapbook. And let me know, any new work that's down the pike, and stay in touch. Where can the audience learn more about you and your work?
I have I have an author Facebook page. I have a Goodreads page. Okay. And I've also got a WordPress page. If you type in Gregory Byrd poetry, Google something like that, usually my stuff will come up.
Okay. Well, I will certainly post that as well on the show notes, so that the audience can check it out.
Excellent. Yeah, I hope to be able to post this as well and have some more people.
Yes, definitely share. Okay. Well, you take it easy, and please stay in touch.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Greg.
Bye-bye.